Share the PowerPoint presentation.
The recording now. There we go. Recording it now. We are discussing anxiety, procrastination, and COVID with Ethan Rothstein and Margot LaPointe. I'm going to let them duke it out for who's going to start the presentation, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Margot LaPointe. I'm the head of the Learning Services and Transitions Department at Sasko River. I'm also an executive functions coach and life coach. I have over 18 years of experience teaching with a master's in education, and I am a certified professional coach. So Ethan and I are going to give our presentation today, and I'm going to have Ethan introduce himself and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us this morning. Great to see the good showing. Margot, thank you. I'm Ethan Rothstein. I'm a psychologist here at the Sasko River Center. I work with kids for therapy, and I also do psychoeducational evaluations. So I do therapy and assessment piece. And, this was a topic, this is, you can see even from the title, anxiety and procrastination, this is where Margot, where our worlds collide as a psychologist and an EF coach. And then, of course, the added layer of COVID right now, which doesn't need its own introduction, but certainly something that's top of mind for a lot of us, unfortunately. So
we're going to start off with our agenda and just let you know where we're going today. The first thing we're going to start off with is what is anxiety. Then we're going to go into procrastination and a little bit about time management, because a lot of people get them confused. We want to make sure that we're very clear about what they both are. And then Ethan's going to talk about brain anatomy and function. And then we'll both come back and talk about overcoming procrastination and managing your anxiety.
Great. And, right off the bat, you might not see the link between anxiety and procrastination, but I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll see how they're intimately related and can really affect each other. So first of all, let's start with anxiety. That is a universal experience. We all experience anxiety on some level, because long ago, it was the body's alarm system to keep us alive. It's a survival mechanism. So if we think about cave dwellers, if we think about wild animals, they all have that anxiety system that's really a fight or flight or freeze system. That's what we would call it, but it's the same wiring. We have the same wiring as alligators, as monkeys, really even basic animals, anything that's got an amygdala, and we'll talk about that brain anatomy, but we share this ancient wiring with a lot of other animals. But now it's 2022, the stressors are different. We're no longer trying to outrun lions. We're trying to do well in school, succeed in our jobs, and stay healthy from COVID. So it's a different set of stressors that we might not be well wired for, because we are wired for acute stressors long ago, but now we have these chronic stressors. COVID, if we think about 2 years ago, as the world was slowly shutting down, it was, let's shut down for 2 weeks, right? That was the chronic stressor, is going to be for 2 weeks. 2 years in, we're still feeling it. So talk about a chronic stressor. We're a good 2 years into this. And well, I don't want to make predictions about what's coming next, but it's not as if things are over.
So procrastination, the bare bones definition is, putting something off until tomorrow, doing something against your better judgment. And, I love throwing a little something in there of the mystical land of 99% of all humans productively motivation and achieve there is stored tomorrow. It always happens tomorrow. And this leads into our next slide, I think, of free beer tomorrow. Ethan had to throw it in. I love it.
Right? So same idea, right? Everything happens tomorrow, right? Tomorrow is going to be the day when I get my work done, when the freebie comes. But it always, this is meant to be funny, but the idea that it's always can be pushed out to tomorrow. Tomorrow is always relative. So this is the procrastination cycle here, and my hope is that this starts to outline how anxiety and procrastination are intimately linked and actually feed back on each other in this negative feedback loop. That's how I think about this cycle. So step one, there's an outcome we want to achieve, right? That goal, that and a lot of people can identify this part. This isn't necessarily the hard part. This is what I need to do, right? We oftentimes we can identify that. Then we think about what's the upside to not doing it right now. So we'll talk about this more, but this immediate gratification, this immediate reward versus long-term reward, right? Well, what can I do that feels better right now? And then it's like, oh shoot, I didn't do that. I squandered this hour, right? This break took longer. I wasted a day. Whatever it is, coulda, woulda, shouldas. And now there's a level of stress that rises to maybe a little bit higher, more like anxiety. And now you've got this choice of either delaying it further or rushing it. Now you're running out of time. Now your stress is not just about the assignment, but stress is about finishing the assignment too, up against the deadline. Oh man, you did this again. I can't believe you did this again. We get this self-defeating attitude and repeat, right? So if you come out of this cycle with, oh man, why did I do this? I'm never going to do it again. Well, you know what? You're going to fall into the same cycle again, and it continues. And so I want you to think about how where would anxiety for you? Where would anxiety show up for your child in this system? Where do you notice it? You know, for instance, younger kids or even older kids, where do you jump in and try to rescue them in this cycle, if at all? Where do you notice where they're at the cycle? Where do they get tripped up? And so one thing I like to think about here is, and we'll talk more about how to break the cycle, but if we look at step one, there's an outcome you want to achieve. One of my recommendations, our recommendations, is to not focus on the outcome you want to achieve, but on the process you want to enact in doing it. So it's not, I want to get an A on this test. It's, how do I study for this test? Right? That's the process in doing that. That's more of the goal than the A, right? It's not, I want to run a mile in under, 7 minutes. It's, I want to be someone who runs every day. There's a big difference. There's a big mental shift there. And you are far more likely to feel successful if you have a process goal. How am I going to enact this rather than what's the outcome I'm looking for? Because that's much more binary. Pass, fail, A or B, I reached it or not, versus today is a vote for or against my goal. That's how I like to think about it. And I stole that from James Clear in Atomic Habits. I'm going to reference him a bunch of times today. And so if you haven't checked out that book, I highly suggest you do. So again, what does anxiety have to do with this? Especially during the pandemic, I don't have to tell you this. It's made work and school unbelievably unpredictable. This year, okay, this academic year may be a little bit better than last academic year, but the amount of gymnastics of hybrid, in, out, quarantines, this, that, it was a mind-boggling extra layer of coordination and stress on top of all the typical things that are already hard to manage, especially in a developing brain. Now we add to this a survival threat. Regardless of your thoughts about your individual thoughts about COVID, kids have been getting the message that this is dangerous, this is a threat to their health, and even more so threats to their loved ones, right? So imagine living under that level of stress. Now it hasn't been 2 weeks or 2 months, it's been 2 years. And in that time, we've been forced, encouraged, however you want to frame it, to socialize in person less, social distancing, right? If we could go back in time, I wish they called that physical distancing, right? They kind of shifted that messaging way late, but it was like, don't socialize. It was like, as a psychologist, that really, because it was like, I know everyone needs to socialize even if they can't be physically close. Zoom is not ideal, right? This is a perfect example of that. This is better than nothing, but not ideal. I would much rather be in a room with you guys, be able to see your face, see your hand go up, you be more engaged. I would feel more connected to you. That's just real life. but those things aren't consistent. And they're unpredictable too. Variance up and down. How does your friends, family feel about COVID? It's a lot of layers there. You add on extracurriculars like sports and other activities have mercifully, they seem to be coming back this academic year, but last year that was a real struggle. What were those outlets for kids and adults? Plus, now everyone's home more. More people are working from home, even part-time. How do we manage that? How do we figure that out? How do we share space for 2 years, work and play under the same roof? That's not easy. We get stressed. There's conflict. There's anxiety. And I don't need to tell you that COVID is not helping with that. And Margot, what about procrastination and COVID?
So procrastination has also increased during the pandemic. I mean, Ethan just talked about anxiety and stress and how that has increased tremendously because there is a perceived threat, COVID. It is a perceived thing. Like, am I going to get it, or is my family going to get it? So these kids are feeling it. Everyone in the world actually is feeling it, not just these kids. Now think about the distractions that everyone has created in their own home. So their home used to be a sanctuary. They come back from school, they come back from home, and didn't have as many distractions potentially, or had a sacred workspace where they would go to. But they might not have that now because of COVID. Everything has been blurred together. And you have these more distractions, and these kids know what they are now because they've been doing them for the past year that they've been locked up at home. And so they're finding ways to get to them and use them and be more distracted. And learning how to be less distracted is really difficult once you've already started that habit. These kids have fewer social interactions too. It's getting better and better now, and hopefully it will continue on that trend. But it's, yes, you have practice. No, you don't have practice. Yes, you have this. No, you don't. And it's a constant give and take of, can I go see my friends? Can I not? And they don't know. And we don't know. We have to look at the TV or the newspaper or go online to find out what are the restrictions now? What are we able to do and what aren't we able to do? And then, you remember, 2 years ago, before the pandemic, we had buffers between home and work and between home and school. We got to go and do things and be out more. And we're doing less and less of that, which makes your stress increase, anxiety increase, and making you want to do less and less. So you're going to procrastinate more and more. And it's an ever-ending circle at this point. So how do we break that? And that's what we're going to get into.
Here's a visual I wanted to share with you guys. The fancy name for this is the Yatesdson Curve, or the Yatesdson Curve, or some call it the law. But what I like about this is I think this explains a lot about performance. You see the outcome here, the dependent variable, if you will, is performance. So how well you did on the test, in the sporting event, in that conversation, right? This can apply across settings. Over here, the independent variable, or right, we could call this level of stress for the sake of this presentation. Truly, it's arousal or activation more generally, but for all intents and purposes, stress is a good way to think about this, right? And what I like about this is it starts to show that stress is neither inherently good or bad. And I think that's an important takeaway from today. We are constantly going to be managing and dealing with stress as humans living in the world, period. We cannot live a stress-free life. So, however, we often talk about stress negatively. I'm so stressed out. This is so stressful. What we're really saying is I'm distressed. Right? The bad verb, distressed. There's actually a word, eustress, 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 a good form of stress, right? That's more of a challenge. That's rising to the occasion. That might be a change in careers that's really positive. Stressful, sure, but in a positive way. A move could be that way. Having a child, stressful, yes, but how you view it as whether it's a challenge or threat is part of where you fall along this continuum. But again, here's the important thing is oftentimes we think about, I'm so stressed out. I'm so distressed. That would put us in this red zone here. I'm in distress. I'm over aroused. I'm too stressed out. So if there's a moderate level, I'm tired, I get anxiety, that's how I might describe it, or panic. It might come out as anger or irritation. Now, eventually, our bodies are not designed to take that for a long-term period of time. So if we're living in this anxiety, panic, anger, super duper stress for a while, eventually our bodies are going to say, I'm done. I can't take, right? Like there's a limit to this. And that's when you get burnout. Your body can start breaking down physically. If we think about this if this were a workout, right? This is, I can't do it anymore, right? Burnout's a little bit more psychological, right? This job, I can't take it anymore. This school, I'm done, right? We obviously don't want to see kids at this level. However, no stress isn't great either. Look at this, right? This is the kid who doesn't care. Whatever, I don't care about my grade, right? It's like the apathy. It's the school's boring. It doesn't engage me. I've got no energy. I've got no oomph, right? Now, a little bit better, it's like, oh, school is easy. I can kind of phone it in and still get an A. That's all right. It's a little bit better, right? But here's this optimal level, growth and learning, where it's, I'm being challenged, not threatened, challenged. There's a big difference. There's a physiological difference there. Threat, we fear, it leads to a sense of dread, it leads to avoidance, but a sense of challenge says, okay, this is going to be tough, but I can handle this. I feel challenged by this presentation. I am stressed by this presentation. I would like to think, though, I'm more in here than I'm more in this growth and learning zone than I am in a distress zone. But I'm sure you've seen speakers that are in the distress zone or start out that way and then regulate and get a little bit more here. Chris Bogart's been giving presentations like this for decades. He might be more in the comfort zone. He could do this with one hand tied behind his back, right? This is not even a challenge to him necessarily, right? So, but the point is that no stress is not good either. We have to find this optimal level. And oftentimes you see kids, when this comes into procrastination, they start out in this blue zone, they wait, and then it's a swing. They jump through this middle zone and they end up on the right side. And now they've gone from seemingly bored and disengaged to terrified and panicked in one swing, right? So we obviously that's not a great cycle, but what I want you to think about is what hits home for your child? What puts your child in that growth and learning zone? What's the right amount of challenge for them? There's a lot of psychological models that would talk about this. Vygotsky would call it the zone of proximal development, a half a click better, a half a click harder than you're capable of right now. That's what we're looking for. That's what's going to put them here. If they're trying to play basketball with Michael Jordan, no way. I'm just going to quit. I can't keep up, right? I also don't want to play basketball with a 3-year-old. That's not fun, right? That's too easy. That's zero challenge. So what's the right level? Oh, it's the peer that's about my level. Maybe slightly better than I am to keep me on my toes.
So why do we procrastinate? And, everybody does it, I think, personally. It's to what level? So it's a coping mechanism that we have all built over time. You have something to do, you don't want to do it, and you put it off. I talk about like the inner coach versus the inner critic. Your inner coach is saying you should do this, and your inner critic saying, let's go do something else, right? So why is this happening? Basically, procrastination comes down to dealing with your emotions and putting off something that doesn't feel good to you. So it's a negative mood. You don't want to write that paper. I don't think I'm going to do well. It's the failure to self-regulate yourself. That's what procrastination is. It's saying, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to go do something that makes me feel better. And, whatever that might be, kids might be going to play video games. They might be going outside and playing with friends. They might be doing different things, but whatever it is, they're putting something off that makes them feel bad for whatever the reason is. They're bored with it. It creates some stress or anxiety. They don't feel right with it. They're frustrated. They have self-doubt. They don't think they can do it. there's a lot of different reasons, fear of failure, fear of success. That was a new one for me a long time ago, of kids are afraid of performing well because then they're going to be expected to continue to do that over and over again. And that's scary. So remember, procrastination is about regulating emotions. It's not necessarily a time management problem. The biggest thing that I hear a lot as an executive function coach is my child is lazy, or this person is lazy in front of me. I personally believe most kids are not lazy and they have a reason for not doing something. And whatever that reason is, we've got to tease out and figure out what it is. Don't get me wrong, there are some people that are lazy. We all know that. But in general, most people aren't, and there's a reason for it, right? So focusing on that negative mood rather than completing the task and saying, I don't feel like this doesn't feel good to me, so I'm going to go do something else. And that's that battle between what should I do and what do I want to do, right? So going back and forth between those two things of making sure that, okay, how do I get started? How do I do this?
Margot, I just want to say about the laziness piece is, sure, there may be laziness in the world, but procrastination isn't inherently laziness. So I think that's part of the distinction there. Procrastination doesn't mean, oh, it's from a place of laziness. It's coming from a different place.
Correct. Yes, thank you. Thanks for clarifying. So how does it affect us? It affects us tremendously. When you have stress or anxiety, it can, or when you're procrastinating something, it's going to increase your stress level. If you have a deadline coming, your stress level is going to rise as you get closer and closer to that deadline, especially if you're not doing the work, right? And it's going to feel awful. And it can manifest itself into like physical things, like migraines, stomach aches. I mean, I know from my own point of view, my child used to come and say, my stomach hurts. That's when I knew something big was coming. And that's when I asked all the questions of what's happening in school? How are your friends? What's going on? Because there's usually some reason if she's not sick, right? So I always ask all the questions to find out what's really happening, to tease it all out. So it does come out. And when you have this stress and you are procrastinating, you tend to have a lower output. Your work is inconsistent because you're stressed and you're not feeling as fresh and as good as you could be while doing the work or preparing for the work or whatever you might be doing. So it results in your output isn't as good. And it's a huge bummer. You've waited this long, you now have to stay up all night and do whatever it is that you're going to do. And then your output isn't as good. So learning how to manage this and making sure that you do a really good job and making sure that you're not procrastinating as much will really help you with all the things that you're doing in your life. So earlier I talked about difference between procrastination and time management. So I'm going to jump into time management now to explain what that is so that we're not confusing the two. So time management, what is it? It's your ability to organize and plan so that you can get something accomplished, creating a goal. So in order to do your time management, you have goal setting. What do you want to accomplish? And figure out what that is. Then you sit down and plan, okay, I have this goal and it's due on this time. How am I going to get this done? When am I going to do it? You organize. What are the materials that I need? Do I need to have anything, or is it just the computer in front of me? Do I need to organize where I'm going to be doing the work and making sure it's, distraction free? And I'm going to prioritize what needs to get done and what doesn't. And what should I start with? I like to start with something that's easy because it's hard for me to get started. Some people like to jump in and do the hardest thing first. Whatever works for you is fine. And then the last part of it is, okay, now I've set my goal, I've planned it, I've organized it, I prioritize it. When am I going to actually sit down and do it? I'm going to schedule it. I actually put it on my calendar on my phone so that I know this is what I have to do at this time. And I have gotten really good at it since, I'm an executive function coach. I have to get all my work done, right? If I don't, I'm a really bad example. So I have to make sure that I procrastinate less and less. Sure, I do a little bit of it, but in general, not. Like Ethan and I started meeting 2 months ago to prepare for this. Because, I know that my stress level will go high if I don't know what I'm going to be saying. And it makes a huge difference. So we managed our time so that we didn't have to procrastinate. So why do we manage our time or mismanage our time? Sorry. So here's what I've learned is people try to do way too much when they're trying to do something. They add on more and more, and especially if you're working from home, you feel like you have all the time in the world, because you kind of do in some ways, but in other ways you don't. You have a finite number of amount of hours in a day. So people are trying to do too much. And when you take on too much, you've got to rush through and complete each task. And it makes it so that it's sloppy and doesn't look as good. The planning part is so important, and people tend to jump into something rather than just plan it and do it. And when I work with people and show them that if you plan and then execute, it makes such a difference, because you know where you're going and you know what's coming and you know how to handle it, right? And failure to prioritize, if you know that something's really important, you've got to put that to the top of the list and make sure you start with that, rather than start with something that doesn't mean anything or is less of a priority. So then the procrastination comes in when you're mismanaging your time. Oh, it's not coming out the way I want. It makes me feel bad. I'm going to put this off, right? And then you've got that pressure, that potentially self-imposed pressure that you've created for yourself of, oh my gosh, I need to do this. I got to get this done. Oh, but it makes me feel bad. So I don't want to do that. I'll do it later. Right? So then the procrastination comes in. So time management and procrastination are two different things. I wanted to make sure that we were very, very clear on that. So how do you increase your time management? There are so many different answers out there, which is good and bad. So finding what works for you, right? So there's the Pomodoro technique, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, where you have a timer, you set the timer for 25 minutes, you work hard for 25 minutes, then you set the timer for 5 minutes, you get that 5-minute break, then 25 minutes of work, and then 5 minutes of break. You do that 4 times, and then you get a larger break. So it's just organizing your time, really, honestly. And then there's so many different apps on your phone that you can use. Find the one that works for you. I personally use a calendar, and I use the calendar on my phone, and everything is on there. Every morning I get up, I manage my time by saying, what have I planned for today? Okay, I know what I have to do. I know where I have to go, and I'm going to go get started. An accountability partner. I'm a big believer in this, of having someone to hold you accountable, to be able to make sure that you're getting what you need to get done. I personally, when I have a new goal, I go and tell everyone what it is. So now I have to go do it. And I feel the pressure, like, okay, I have to go do it. But it's that good pressure that Ethan talked about of like, okay, I really want to get this done. I really want to do it. And now I've told everybody I really have to do it now. And then we also talked about Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm a huge, huge believer in this book. It has explained so many things about habits and creating good habits for yourself. Time management, learning how to manage your time well and create that habit for yourself. It's a gift. And, James Clear explains it very well. It's not too, science-y, but yet he explains it in a way that you can really understand it. One of the biggest things he talks about is making a 1% improvement in your time every day. And if you can do that, over a course of a year, you're 37 times better. It's pretty incredible, right? I'm a huge believer. So if you have the time and the motivation, go read the book. It's awesome.
Agreed. So I wanted to talk briefly about the brain, what's happening inside our heads in this whole cycle. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but this is a side view here of the brain. So in the back, this would be the back of the head, the cerebellum. The red part, the frontal lobe, is the front, the tippy front. The farther back in the brain we are, the more primitive it is. So we share the cerebellum with reptiles and other more basic animals. We get fancier and fancier as we move forward. A monkey brain looks a heck of a lot like our brain, except for the prefrontal cortex. There's a tiny bit of matter at the very front of our brain that's added onto this frontal lobe, but that is where you can point to the executive functioning center of the brain. That is what separates us from monkeys. That's why we can plan and organize and think ahead 2 months and fly planes and read books. It's a small amount of matter. It's a huge impact. But again, thinking about how our fancy modern, relatively modern part of our brain intersects with the more primitive and basic, that part of the brain, that ancient wiring that I talked about. So 2 parts in particular of the brain I wanted to focus on, that prefrontal cortex, but then also the amygdala, which is the limbic system. Now, this limbic system we share, again, with a lot of creatures. That's what we might describe as the seat of emotions and anxiety. For a creature, it's fight or flight. And guess what? It's the same thing. Anxiety is your fight or flight response in a modern age. That's all it is. That's just the human way to describe that experience. And so, but the important thing for us to realize is when that amygdala starts firing, you can think it starts pouring away resources from that prefrontal cortex. The brain goes into survival mode. And in doing so, it focuses on immediate rewards and immediate consequences. All right, it doesn't care about next week. So imagine, because the amygdala is designed to help the zebra who's trying to outrun the lion in the desert, okay, or on the plains, okay? It's like the zebra is chased by the lion. Their amygdala starts firing. That zebra has got 2 choices. It can fight or flee, right? Fight or flight. It's probably gonna run. You know what? In a few minutes, that situation is gonna be over one way or another. Either the zebra managed to outrun the lion in a few minutes, or the lion got him.
Hello.
Either way,
Oh, hey,
that
Mom.
amygdala can calm down after. So that whole situation may have only taken a few minutes. Huge stressor, life-threatening stressor, but
Okay.
it's over. It's acute. So the important thing to realize is in doing that, the zebra doesn't care about next week. In fact, the zebra doesn't care. The zebra doesn't care. The zebra's immune system doesn't care about getting sick next week if it doesn't survive this situation, right? So now, what does this system, this ancient wiring, this zebra wiring look like for us? What it looks like is an amygdala that pulls away resources from that prefrontal cortex. So literally, as your child becomes activated, as you become activated, more anxious, more stressed, more aroused, you might describe it as, I'm not thinking clearly. And you're exactly right. Your prefrontal cortex, your executive functioning center, your planning, your manager of your brain, kind of set up. I'm out today, right? And the amygdala takes over. The amygdala is trying to help you survive the moment. We're no longer worried about next week, okay? We're just trying to survive the moment. So what does that look like for a stressed kid who's trying to do an assignment, right? We think about, right, procrastination as an emotion regulation issue. As their emotion spikes, how are they trying to regulate that discomfort? Doing the assignment might not regulate their discomfort in the moment. It might be something else. It might be something that doesn't quite seem to make sense, like video games, food, avoiding, getting in an argument, et cetera, right? But the idea is those things all feel a heck of a lot better than this assignment right now. And I'm in fight or flight mode, so I care about right now. I need to survive the moment, not the month. I need to survive the moment. And so actually, if you look at a study that did brain imaging of chronic procrastinators, found that the amygdala is actually larger, right? So what does that say? Larger amygdala, more powerful, more anxiety, if you will. Oh, look at that. That's managing to overtake the prefrontal cortex a little bit more, right? So we see brain level differences in people who tend to procrastinate a lot and people who don't. So the prefrontal cortex, like I said, it's those higher order functions. It's the manager, it's the conductor of the orchestra, right? The conductor does not play a single note, but allows everyone to play in harmony, okay, right? But he's gonna say, or she's gonna say, hey, drums, you're too loud right now. Oh, tubas, I need more of you. Okay, violins, you're off beat, right? That person is critical to that system. but you don't hear a thing from that conductor, right? That's the executive function system. That's when you've got a student, wow, they're so bright. They're so good at math. They totally get this. Yes, all of their sections are great. They're talented, but their manager stinks. Their conductor can't get them to play all together, that kind of thing, right? So that's that prefrontal cortex. And what it's also allowing us to do is saying, okay, I'm not going to get the reward right now, but I will next week, right? And if we think about real primary rewards, there's only a couple. Food, water, reproduction. Those are the primary drives. After that, it's secondary reinforcers, things we associate with them, like grades, money, relationships, right? And so, but those are in essence intermediate rewards on the way to that primary reward. And again, we got to think on a primitive level. But the idea, so if you think about a student who needs to study for a test, they're going to go in and they're going to take that test, and they're going to get no feedback, no reward necessarily, even if they aced it, no immediate reward, no feedback from the teacher. They're going to turn it in. Best case, they get that test back a few days later. I got my A, right? Some kids can hold that, right? Oh, good. All that studying, 3 days later, I finally get the A. Some kids, they don't, it's harder to connect it. Or it's the teacher who doesn't give the assignment back for a month. Oof, all that hard work was lost. What was that hard work for? I forget. I can't connect the dots here, right? And so not only a grade, but then what does that grade mean? Well, that grade's going to go into your final grade. Okay, what does that mean? Well, then that's going to help you get into the class next year. Okay, what does that mean? Well, then eventually you're going to take the classes you want in high school. Okay, what does that mean? Well, then you're going to take those classes and you're going to apply to college. Okay, then we're going to, right? It's this never-ending delayed reward, delayed gratification that as adults we're much better at. Our brains are more fully formed. Brains aren't, this prefrontal cortex is not fully formed till 25 in the average male, 20 in females. So you can see how for any high schooler, it's just not firing on all cylinders. And that's no fault of their own. That's just where their brain is at. That's also why college students make terrible decisions, and they tend to act more like children or adolescents than adults, right? All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but around 25, people start making better choices. That's that prefrontal cortex coming online. That's the ability to delay that gratification or reward hours, days, months, even years down the line. But that's really hard in a developing brain. And
Hold on,
again, if we look
to
at some
add quickly, Ethan, if
yeah.
you have ADHD or ADD, your prefrontal cortex is delayed even further. So it may not be 25, it might be 30. Just to be aware of that, because there is a delay there.
Yes, you're totally right, Margot. Thank you. So there is that delay. There can be that catch-up period. But yes, there's evidence that kids with ADHD, that prefrontal cortex is about 30% delayed, right? So, oh man, that means your 12-year-old might have the prefrontal cortex of an 8-year-old. Right? Think about those executive functions you expect from a 12-year-old in middle school versus an 8-year-old in elementary school. We have different expectations for those, but on an individual basis, there's a lot of variability. And in fact, with this delayed reward piece, again, those procrastinators and in studies tend to be more impulsive, right? They reach for the immediate reward, the immediate gratification. Procrastinators have a harder time suspending that reward or gratification into the future. So it's this battle, right? The amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex. I think about like they're like battling each other, right? So as the amygdala fires up, we care about immediate rewards, we care about now, we care about survival, right? And you can see how it can show up in unique ways or in unexpected ways. It could show up as, I'm really anxious about this, right? Okay, that's obvious, right? My child was able to verbalize, I was able to verbalize that I'm feeling anxious. But then there's more subtle ways where it's like, I'm frustrated by this. I'm bored by this, right? We think about that curve again, the Yatesdson curve, like where they are in that. This task is unpleasant, right? These are all emotional responses here. And If we perceive the task as a threat, that's going to activate the amygdala. The difference between a challenge and a threat can be a fine line, but our body and our brains respond differently. If you did a brain imaging, if you hooked me up with physiological equipment, you could tell whether a stressor is, I interpret that as a challenge, like, okay, this is tough, but I can handle it, or a threat, like, oh my goodness, this is too much. This is overwhelming, right? So if I do perceive it as a threat, now I'm in fight or flight mode. Now I'm trying everything I can to get away from the stressor, even if it looks silly, even if it kind of puts me in a tough spot next week. Whew, right now, my amygdala feels like it's saving me. Whew, I got you out of that situation, that kind of thing. And that feels really good. And that's why it's so reinforcing. That's negative reinforcement. The more I play video games, the less anxiety I feel about my assignments. Oh, that's going to make video games really appealing, right? Because they take away that negativity. They also add some fun stuff too, don't get me wrong. But I feel less crummy is a huge reward.
In the here and now, less crummy.
Yes, exactly. So if we're thinking about anxiety, and we're thinking about procrastination as an emotion regulation issue, part of this is we have to regulate those emotions. We have to regulate that anxiety before we shift into productivity mode, before we shift into planning, executive functioning. Oh, I can suspend this reward for a week or more mode. Okay, right? So the first things first is this a true alarm or a false alarm? Right? That anxiety we feel is the body's alarm system. It goes off whether it's a true alarm or a false alarm. And you know the crummy thing is it can be just as loud, true or false alarm, right? The fire drill in school is just as loud as the real thing, right? Now, in that moment, maybe we do some things to assess whether it's a true alarm or a false alarm. The fire alarm goes off in the office, right? We're in construction, it happens. So do I immediately bail out the window? No, right? I go, okay, it's a true alarm or a false alarm, right? Now, if there were flames burning, poof, there I go, right? But I've had to assess for evidence that this is a true alarm. If I go and touch the doorknob if it's hot, woof. Now, if I go out and I stick my head on, there's construction workers saying, sorry, we hit the wall. Oh, okay, right? Go back to, all right, good. I got the evidence that this is a false alarm, okay? My alarm, right? My anxiety spiked. Okay, but this is a false alarm. Why? Because I'm not in danger. So the two questions you need to ask yourself, or your child needs to ask himself to determine if it's a true alarm or a false alarm. Is it likely, and is it dangerous? The answer has to be yes to both of them for it to be a true alarm. If it's yes to just one of them or neither of them, it's actually a false alarm. It doesn't mean they aren't experiencing anxiety there, but it's encouraging them to think about it in a different way. Is this actually a threat to you? Is there actually danger in going to school? What are the odds of you failing this test? Those sorts of questions. So we're looking at likelihood and danger when we're assessing if it's a true alarm or false alarm. That inner coach versus an inner critic, right? That's that inner voice that we all have, right? Sometimes it can be positive. It gives you the pep talk, like that great coach that's really encouraging. And then sometimes it's your worst enemy that puts all that self-doubt in your head, right? Who's louder in that moment can be a big thing. The more we practice and the more power we give to that inner coach, the better off we're going to be, right? That positive self-talk is another way to frame it. That's really what we need to practice. The more we practice, the better it's going to be. I mentioned that fine line between threat and challenge. Again, we have some impact on how we interpret that, right? Some things will be clearly threatening. Some things might be more clearly challenging, right? But there's going to be some things in that gray area there, right? So how do we channel that, what we might see as anxiety into excitement or motivation? You'll see this a lot in sports teams. A player who's super nervous before a football game channels that into, right? They're banging each other on the helmet, right? Rah, rah, right? Now, I'm sure on a physiological level, they share a lot of similarities with somebody who's anxious, but they are channeling that into something that's adaptive, right? In their sense. I like to think about it like I mentioned before. This talk, makes me anxious. I have butterflies in my stomach right now. I like to think about, how do I get those butterflies to fly in formation? I know I'm not getting rid of them. I'm really, public speaking is one of those things that I think for most people, but I'll speak for myself, that like I'll never not be nervous to do it, but I just got to decide, how am I going to interpret that? Do I turn it into excitement and try to get engaged and just pour my energy into the presentation, right? Have those guys fly in unison, or do I see it as, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Things that sense of challenge I've been able to manage each time I do one of these, right? So it's gotten better. But I've had to experience that. And certainly early on, I had to quiet that threat response. I really did it. And some of those butterflies weren't cooperative. But eventually, if we can just manage it, we're not trying to get to zero anxiety. We're trying to get to a manageable level of anxiety. So now where do I fall on that curve? I'm not at burnout. I'm not at threat. I'm more at a challenge level. And this leads in, again, you can see that it overlap between anxiety and procrastination and executive functioning. Make a plan, okay? The worst feeling is to feel stuck academically, psychologically, in relationships. I mean, you name it. Nobody likes to feel stuck. We all want to have options. We all want to have a plan, right? So this goes to Margot's earlier point about time management being a small piece of this. And I do think it can help shift. But especially in ancient anxiety sense, if we're in freeze mode, how do we get unstuck? That's that deer in the headlights look, right? That's the third response in fight, flight, or speed or freeze.
Okay, so procrastination, like, how do we deal with it? What do you do when you are procrastinating, and how do we get out of this cycle? So hopefully dealing with your anxiety helps it so that you're able to start to tackle something. The biggest thing, the most important thing here is acknowledging and knowing that you're actually procrastinating. And so notice when it happens. Or you're asking yourself, why is this happening to me right now? What am I trying to avoid? What's making me feel badly? What emotion am I feeling right now? So acknowledging that you're procrastinating, now you're starting to look at it in a different way. You're not just going through it and, having your inner critic and your inner coach, tell you what to do. You're saying, okay, here it is. I'm procrastinating right now. When is this happening? Does it happen at the same time every day? Does it happen with certain things you're meant to be doing? I know when I was in school, it was whenever I had to write a paper, because I didn't want to write the paper. It made me feel bad. So I put it off as long as possible. But now as an adult, I know that if I put something off, my stress is going to increase, and it's going to make me feel worse than that feeling of feeling badly at that moment. So I know that if I start to tackle it and do a little bit at a time and organize my space, know what I need to do before I get started. I do a little cleanup. I don't clean the whole house, which I used to do, right? But now I just clean my workspace and making sure that I have that space ready for me to get to work. I make a plan for myself. Okay, you know what? I want to do this and I want it done by this time. I'm going to plan it out when I'm going to do it. I do the prep. I make sure that I have all the materials that I need. I've done the research that I need, whatever it might be, but I get to start to focus on, okay, what is the task at hand, rather than getting all this stuff to be able to accomplish this task. The biggest thing is practicing good habits for yourself. And you have to start somewhere. The littlest thing will make a huge difference. Getting started at all will change how you start to look at procrastination. So each time you notice that you're procrastinating, make a little bit of a change and start to continue to do that every time you do it. And, for me, again, I'm going to say the accountability factor is huge. Of, working with someone else on this presentation, I was accountable to Ethan to make sure that I did what I said I was going to do. And I make sure that I do that. And I say, by this date, we're going to meet again. And I'm going to make sure I get my work done prior to that date. And I always plan the day before. I make sure that I can review all the work that I've done to make sure that I finished what I needed to do. Or if I have questions or whatever it might be, to make sure all of that is buttoned up and finished. So for procrastination, I want to really reiterate, acknowledging that you're procrastinating, knowing that this is happening is the first step, and really understanding that, okay, I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? And start to make those changes a little bit at a time. It makes a huge difference for you. So
And I
overcoming,
just wanted to,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to piggyback on what you were saying with a couple of those. A lot of these things echo that, but do you want to talk about mindfulness real quick?
Yeah, mindfulness, making sure that you're able to calm your mind and be able to do that in the best possible way. And that can be meditation, that could be going for a run, that can be whatever you do to help you just kind of bring your mind back to center. And whatever that is to be able to calm those voices in your head. Ethan talked about that inner voice that we have. What are you saying to yourself? Are you being good to yourself or not? And how can you change it and just alter it a little bit, even to be neutral to yourself rather than just bad? And understanding like, okay, my mind is calm. Like now I want to look at consistency over intensity. How can I do this in a consistent manner? I want to work a little bit every day, or I want to work for an hour and give myself a break, and work for another hour and give myself a break. But being consistent about what you're doing is a huge thing. I talk about this with my clients a lot. Consistency is a big deal. I have middle school clients that I talk about, okay, let's be consistent, because you're not going to be done with school after middle school. You've got to go to high school. And then after high school is college. These high school kids are working so hard to get into college. And I asked them, what's the goal? And they said to get into college. I'm like, okay, but once you get into college, you're going to have to keep working. Do you realize that? How are you going to be able to maintain this? Because they get so intense and work so hard. And then there's that burnout factor. So consistency is huge, and making sure to teach that to our kids and to the adults of this world now, to make sure that you're able to consistently do your work, and instead of being really intense and have that burnout. I talked about a sacred workspace.
Margot,
go ahead.
I just want to add about consistency over intensity. You can see that with work, but it's very clear when we think about exercise or diet, right?
Yes.
The crash diets, I'm going to work out for 3 hours, right? And then it's not sustainable, right? So inevitably, or the New Year's resolution, or I'm going to lose this amount of weight this month, like that doesn't continue. James Clear talks about a guy who wants to get healthier. Part of that is to lose weight, but his goal is to go to the gym for 5 minutes every day. And do you know what he ends up doing? He goes to the gym 5 minutes every day. And that's how he starts. But in doing so, he becomes somebody who goes to the gym every day. That was the important goal. Not, I want to lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds. In fact, he lost 100 pounds by doing this, but that wasn't the goal, right? That wasn't his stated goal. And you know what? He might have actually gotten discouraged if he had focused on the scale. Instead, he focused on, am I consistent? And that started with 5 minutes, because that was manageable. And obviously that 5 minutes, you can see how that by becoming consistent, James Clear talks a lot about this, but it's like becoming part of your identity. I'm someone who goes to the gym every day. I'm someone who runs every day. I'm someone who eats healthy. I'm someone who gets their homework done right after school, that kind of thing. And that becomes more of the goal than the college, the number on the scale, what have you.
And that leads into the process versus outcome. I, as a teacher, am all about the process and always have been. Whatever the outcome is, but the process is what it's all about. Going through, doing the work, making it happen, going to the gym for 5 minutes every day. That's the process that we'll keep focused on, rather than the losing the weight, the eating, having, better numbers when you go to the doctor, all of those things. But it's all about what you are doing and your habits that you create for yourself, and being able to make sure that happens every day, and making sure that you build on it every day. And that makes the change. That breaks the cycle of whatever you've been doing. Make step one the easiest possible thing. So if you can get started, write anything on the paper, go to the gym for 5 minutes, eat a carrot, whatever it might be, is to make that first step as easy as possible so that you actually get to it and potentially want to continue. Dedicate the time. Know that I'm going to go to the gym at, when I first get up in the morning, or when I get home from work or finish work, or whatever it might be, but schedule that time and actually put it on your calendar and make it happen, and have someone to be accountable to. I went to the gym every day. Celebrate it. I'm a big believer in celebrating all the good things that you do and the accomplishments that you have. Make it so that you want to achieve it, right? If I do that, I'm going to get to, go walk the dog and have a great time with him, or whatever it is that you enjoy, have a nice dinner or whatever it might be. But celebrate whatever it is that you accomplish and make it so that you want to continue to do this. So again, think about it as mindfulness. Take that stress and lower it again as much as you can. Be as consistent as you can with whatever you're doing. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency over time. Make that sacred workspace so that this is where I'm going to do it. Focus on the process of, I'm going to do a little bit at a time. This is the part that I want to work on. I'm not looking at this end goal as my final, but I want to get to be this better person by doing this a little bit every day. Start with the easiest thing first, dedicate that time to it, and be accountable to it. It sounds easy, but it's certainly not. We all know that.
So here are some of the, I think, really good resources. Obviously, we've referenced Atomic Habits a number of times. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. I also alluded to with, in the sense of chronic stress, right? The punchline being, zebras don't endure chronic stress. It's just acute stress. It's just the lion. We, on the other hand, endure chronic stress, enter physiological impacts like ulcers, right? So that's the title there. But I think it paints a really nice contrast between sort of how our body's wired to respond to stress and how it has to now in the modern age. I don't know. By all means, if you guys have questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mindset is the growth mindset. This is in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. They talk about the internal changes as long as the external changes. Also on the chat, I'm seeing there are 2 things on here that I wanted to say. That someone said that there's a condensed version of Atomic Habits available in auto version on Hoopla. Sounds really cool. You can get it at the Connecticut libraries, and it's apparently much easier to get through. Love that. And then someone asked the best way to develop that in the later state, late teens, 20s, and 30s. And I'm assuming we're talking about procrastination. And so it doesn't matter how old you are, to make sure that with procrastination, you're really following all the things that we talked about of, really, really look at why are you procrastinating, acknowledging that you're doing it, look for the patterns, organize your workspace. You have to get whoever's doing it to understand what it's all about, and that it's an emotional thing, not necessarily a time management thing. Any other questions?
And as we,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna, as we get older, we have more and more control over how we modify our environment, right? So that's really one of my take homes from Atomic Habits is, what can we do to the environment, also internally, but really we can do a lot of things to create better habits and stamp out negative ones, right? How to make them as easy as possible, as make them appealing, make them satisfying, and then what's the opposite of that? If you have a habit you're trying to break, how do you make it difficult? How do you make it unappealing? How do you, right? There's an example of, this is an extreme example, but just to put, and this also touches on accountability partners, but there was a woman who was trying to quit smoking, really hard habit to kick. She tried, failed, tried, failed, tried, failed. You know what she ended up doing? She opens up a checking account. I forget, $5,000 or $10,000 she put in there. Not a small sum for her. I just want to be clear about that. And she gave her friend, her best friend, access to that account and said, if I smoke another cigarette, I want you to donate that money, wait for it, to the KKK. Gasp, right? Just to be clear again, this woman is not racist or supportive of the KKK. In fact, it was the opposite. But the idea being is that accountability plus wow, if I smoke, it's not like a charity's getting 10K. 10K is going to some organization that I loathe. Wow, that makes smoking so unappealing. So that's an extreme version of accountability and making a habit unappealing. But I just wanted to put that out there to help illustrate like how far you can take these. The flip side is, having your workspace set, like Margot mentioned, having it set so when you come home it's ready to work, not now I need to organize it, or putting on your gym clothes first thing. You're way more likely to get to the gym if you just put them on, right? That's that easy first step. I can put on my clothes. That's not, there's not a lot of barriers to that. So